The rain lashed against the windows of our small home, a relentless rhythm that mirrored the unease settling in my chest. Mom and I were busy packing supplies into cartons for a local fundraiser. Her calm demeanor was a comfort, a steady anchor in our chaotic lives. "Here, let me take that," I offered, grabbing the large water bottle from her hands. "Be careful, Paula," she said, her voice tinged with both warmth and weariness. Just as I placed the bottle in the carton, the front door creaked open. The sound was jarring, cutting through the relative peace of the room. We turned to see Neil, my older brother, standing in the doorway. His face was pale, his eyes wide with an emotion I couldn't quite place. "Neil?" Mom asked, concern evident in her tone. He didn't respond immediately. Instead, he took a shaky step inside, his hands trembling as he gripped the edge of the doorframe. "Mom." His voice was hoarse, barely audible over the rain. "What's wrong, son?" Mom asked, setting down the box she was holding and moving toward him. He looked at her, his lips quivering as if struggling to form words. Finally, he said something that sent a cold shock through the room. "I'm pregnant." The words hung in the air, absurd and impossible, yet spoken with a seriousness that made my stomach churn. "What?" I blurted, my voice a mix of disbelief and alarm. I don't know how," Neil stammered, his eyes welling up with tears, "but it's true. I can feel it." "You're a man," I said, my voice rising. "How could you possibly be pregnant?" "I don't know," he shouted, his voice breaking. I just am." Mom stood frozen, her hands pressed to her mouth as she tried to process what she had just heard. Before the shock of Neil's revelation could settle, the front door slammed open again. This time, it was Rossy, my older sister, her face flushed with anger and tears streaming down her cheeks. "Mom, don't listen to him," she shouted, her voice sharp and filled with venom. "He's lying." "Rossy, enough," Mom said, her voice trembling with exhaustion. "This is not the time." "No, Mom," Rossy interrupted, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. "He's just trying to cover up his own failures." "Rossy," I snapped, stepping between her and Neil. But she wasn't finished. Her anger shifted to desperation as she turned to Mom. "Mom," she hesitated, her voice breaking. "I'm pregnant." The room fell into a stunned silence. Mom's face turned pale, and she stumbled back, clutching the edge of the table for support. "What did you just say?" Mom whispered, her voice barely audible. "I'm pregnant," Rossy repeated, her voice trembling, "and I don't know who the father is." The slap came out of nowhere. Mom's hand connected with Rossy's cheek, the sound echoing through the room. Rossy staggered back, her hand flying to her face as tears streamed down her cheeks. "You've brought shame to this family," Mom screamed, her anger boiling over. "How could you be so careless?" "I'm sorry, Mom," Rossy sobbed, falling to her knees. "I didn't mean for this to happen. Please forgive me." Mom wasn't listening. She stormed into Rossy's room, throwing her belongings out into the hallway in a fit of rage. "You don't deserve to stay in this house," Mom shouted. "You've humiliated us all." I watched in stunned silence, unable to move or speak as my sister's life was torn apart before my eyes. Rossy's absence at the dinner table that night was a gaping void. The air was heavy with tension, and no one dared to speak. Neil sat across from me, his head bowed, his food untouched. Mom muttered prayers under her breath, her hands trembling as she clutched her rosary. The following morning, I tried to talk to Rossy at school. She was sitting alone in the cafeteria, her once bright eyes dull and lifeless. I approached her cautiously, but as soon as she saw me, she stood up and walked away without a word. "Rossy, wait." I called after her, but she ignored me, disappearing into the crowd of students. 2 weeks passed, and Rossy continued to avoid me. The distance between us was unbearable, but I didn't know how to bridge the gap. Then, one night, everything changed. It was late when I got home from a school project. The house was quiet, but something felt off. I couldn't find Rossy anywhere. "Mom, have you seen Rossy?" I asked, my voice tinged with worry. "She's probably out with her friends," Mom said dismissively. But something didn't feel right. The next morning, I decided to search for her at school. I checked every classroom, every hallway, but there was no sign of her. Then, I heard a faint noise coming from the old storage room, a place that had been abandoned for years. I hesitated at the door, my heart pounding in my chest. Slowly, I pushed it open and shone my flashlight inside. What I saw made my blood run cold. Rossy was lying on the floor, her hands and feet bound, her mouth covered with duct tape. Her face was bruised, and dried blood stained her clothes. A black cat sat beside her, its yellow eyes glowing in the darkness. "Ate Rossy," I cried, rushing to her side. Her eyes fluttered open, and she looked at me with a mixture of relief and terror. "Paula," she whispered through the tape. I quickly began to untie her, but she shook her head violently. "Get out of here," she hissed, her voice urgent. "They'll come back. You have to leave." Before I could respond, footsteps echoed in the hallway. "Hide," Rossy whispered desperately. I scrambled into the shadows just as the door creaked open, and a group of men entered, their cruel laughter filling the room. The storage room grew darker as the group of men entered, their laughter reverberating in the confined space like a cruel symphony. I crouched in the corner, my heart pounding so loudly that I was sure they could hear it. Through the crack between the crates, I could see Rossy lying on the cold floor, her bruised face barely illuminated by the dim bulb hanging overhead. One of the men knelt beside her, his grin wide and wicked. "Well, Miss Pregnant, how are we feeling today?" he sneered, grabbing her face roughly. Rossy turned her head away, her defiance still alive despite the circumstances. "You're all monsters," she spat, her voice shaking but firm. The man laughed, releasing her face as he stood. "Monsters? No, sweetheart. We're just men who know how to take what we want." The other men snickered as one of them kicked over a chair, creating a loud crash that made me flinch. My fists clenched at my sides, anger and helplessness warring within me. "You should have stayed quiet, Rossy," another man said, his tone mocking. "Now you're in this mess because you couldn't keep your mouth shut." Rossy glared at him. "Do whatever you want with me, but leave my family out of this," she demanded, her voice laced with desperation. "Your family?" The first man smirked. "Oh, you mean your precious little sister, Paula?" I froze, my breath catching in my throat. "Don't you dare touch her," Rossy screamed, struggling against her restraints. "If you lay a finger on her, You'll what?" The man leaned down, his face inches from hers. "You're in no position to make threats, Rossy. But don't worry, we're not unreasonable. We'll consider sparing her if you play nice." I couldn't take it anymore. My body trembled with rage and fear as I watched my sister endure their cruelty. But what could I do? I was just one person, weak, scared, and unarmed. Suddenly, one of the men turned toward the door. "Let's go. We've wasted enough time here." The others followed, leaving Rossy alone and broken. I waited until their footsteps faded before crawling out of my hiding spot. "Eight, I'm here," I whispered, rushing to her side. Her eyes filled with tears as she looked at me. "Paula, you shouldn't have stayed. It's not safe." "I couldn't leave you," I said firmly, untying her restraints. "Come on, we need to get out of here before they come back." Rossy winced as she tried to stand, her body battered and weak. I wrapped her arm around my shoulder and helped her out of the storage room, every step filled with silent prayers for safety. By the time we reached home, it was late, and the house was eerily quiet. I helped Rossy to her room, where she collapsed onto the bed, her breaths shallow and labored. "Wait here," I said, rushing to get a damp cloth and some first aid supplies. When I returned, Rossy was staring blankly at the ceiling, tears streaming silently down her bruised face. I gently dabbed at her wounds, trying to keep my hands steady despite the lump in my throat. 8. Who were those men? I asked softly, unable to keep the question bottled up any longer. Rossy's lips quivered as she closed her eyes. They're the father's men, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. The father? I repeated, confused. The father of my baby, she clarified, her voice cracking. He's a powerful man, Paula. I thought he loved me, but when I told him I was pregnant, he turned into a monster. He said I was trying to trap him, to ruin his life. My heart ached as I listened to her story. Rossy, my strong and vibrant sister, had been reduced to this, broken and terrified. I'm so sorry, 8, I said, my tears mingling with hers. It's not your fault, she said, reaching out to squeeze my hand. But you have to promise me something, Paula. No matter what happens, you have to stay safe. Don't let them hurt you. I promise, I whispered, though the words felt hollow. How could I protect myself when I couldn't even protect her? The next day at school, rumors about Rossy's disappearance began to spread. Whispers filled the hallways, and every time someone mentioned her name, my stomach twisted with guilt and fear. I avoided everyone, keeping my head down and my thoughts to myself. But as the day dragged on, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. When I got home, Rossy was gone. Mom, where's 8? I asked, panic creeping into my voice. She went out, Mom said, not looking up from her sewing. She said she needed to clear her head. Hours passed, and Rossy didn't return. I tried calling her phone, but it went straight to voicemail. The unease in my chest grew into a full-blown panic. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept imagining her alone and vulnerable, at the mercy of those men. Around midnight, I decided to search for her. I wandered the streets, calling her name into the empty darkness. The wind howled around me, and the shadows seemed to stretch and shift, as if mocking my desperation. Finally, I found her. She was lying in the alley behind the school, her body battered and lifeless. Blood pooled beneath her, staining the cold concrete. 8, I screamed, rushing to her side. Her eyes fluttered open, and she looked at me with a faint smile. Paula. Don't talk, I said, tears streaming down my face. I'll get help. No, she said weakly, her hand reaching up to touch my cheek. It's too late for me. No, don't say that, I sobbed, clutching her hand. You're going to be okay. I'll save you. Paula, listen to me, she said, her voice trembling. Don't let them win. Promise me you'll stay strong. I promise, I whispered, though my heart was breaking. Her hand fell limp in mine, and her eyes closed for the last time. The days after Rossy's death were a blur. The house was quieter than ever, but not in the comforting way silence sometimes brought. Instead, it was heavy, oppressive, like the air itself carried the weight of our collective grief. Mom barely spoke, her anger and sadness simmering just below the surface. As for me, I couldn't shake the haunting image of Rossy lying in that cold alley, her life stolen by cruelty. School became a battleground for whispers and stares. Everyone seemed to know something, though no one dared to say it outright. Each hushed conversation felt like a dagger to my chest. My friends avoided me, their pity too suffocating for them to endure. But I couldn't stop thinking about Rossy's final words. Don't let them win. It became a mantra, replaying in my mind every time I felt like collapsing under the weight of my grief. I didn't know how to fight back, but I knew I had to try. For Rossy. One night, while searching through her room for something, anything that could give me answers, I found a journal tucked away beneath her mattress. It was worn, the edges frayed from years of use. I hesitated before opening it, feeling like I was invading her privacy, but desperation overruled my guilt. The entries started innocently enough. Her dreams, her hopes, and snippets of her daily life. But as I read further, the tone shifted. She wrote about the man who fathered her child, describing him as charming but possessive. She mentioned feeling trapped and how he became more controlling with time. Then, the later entries grew darker. "I'm scared of him. He says he loves me, but his actions say otherwise. And now, with this baby, I don't know what to do. If anything happens to me, please protect Paula. She's all I have left." Tears blurred my vision as I closed the journal. My resolve hardened. I needed to find out who this man was and make sure he paid for what he did. Armed with Rossy's journal, I began piecing together clues. She mentioned meeting him at a local coffee shop, so I decided to start there. The shop was bustling with life, a stark contrast to the darkness I felt inside. I approached the barista, trying to mask my anxiety. "Excuse me, do you remember seeing a girl named Rossy here? She used to come often." The barista tilted her head, thinking, "Oh yeah, she used to sit near the window with that guy. He was tall, had dark hair, always dressed sharp. They seemed close." "Do you know his name?" I asked, my heart pounding. She shook her head. "Sorry, I don't, but he drove a black SUV. I saw him drop her off a few times." It wasn't much, but it was a start. Over the next few days, I staked out the coffee shop, hoping to catch a glimpse of the mysterious man. My patience was rewarded when I saw the black SUV pull up one evening. A man stepped out, tall and sharply dressed, just as the barista had described. I watched from a distance as he entered the shop, his movements confident and deliberate. He didn't stay long, leaving with a cup of coffee in hand. I followed him discreetly, my heart racing with every step. He led me to an upscale apartment complex on the other side of town. I noted the building's name and address, vowing to dig deeper into his life. Back at home, I searched online for information about the apartment complex. It catered to the city's wealthy elite, and residents were required to provide extensive identification to secure a lease. If he lived there, he wasn't just anyone. Using Rossy's journal, I cross-referenced names and locations, trying to narrow down his identity. Finally, I found him, Andrew Salcedo. His name was linked to several businesses, most of which seemed legitimate, but there were whispers of illegal dealings in the shadows. I felt a chill run down my spine. This wasn't just a man who hurt my sister. He was dangerous. Despite my fear, I couldn't back down. I decided to confront him, but I knew I couldn't do it alone. I needed help. The next day, I approached my friend Clara. She had always been the bold one, unafraid to speak her mind. "Clara, I need your help," I said, my voice trembling. She frowned, concern etched across her face. "Paula, what's going on? You've been so distant lately." I hesitated before handing her Rossy's journal. This will explain everything." Clara read in silence, her expression shifting from confusion to shock to anger. "This guy, he's a monster," she said, her hands shaking. "What do you need me to do?" "I need to find out more about him," I said. "Where he goes, who he talks to. Anything that can help me figure out how to take him down." Clara nodded, her resolve matching mine. "I'm with you." Together, we began to gather information, our investigation pulling us deeper into a web of lies and corruption. The more we uncovered, the more I realized just how dangerous Andrew truly was. But I couldn't stop. Not now. Not when I was so close to getting justice for Rossy. The days grew longer as Clara and I dove headfirst into uncovering more about Andrew Salcedo. His name carried weight, and his connections ran deeper than I could have imagined. He wasn't just a man with a dark past. He was a force in the city's underworld. Clara and I worked tirelessly, poring over everything we could find. Social media posts, news articles, public records, anything that might lead us closer to the truth. Through careful digging, we learned that Andrew owned several businesses, including a nightclub called the Velvet Shadow, known for its exclusivity and secrecy. "This place could be our way in," Clara said, her determination mirroring my own. "I agree, but we can't just walk in there," I replied, biting my lip. We need a plan. Clara smirked, pulling out her phone. Leave that to me. 2 days later, we stood outside the Velvet Shadow, dressed in clothes that screamed confidence and elegance, an armor to blend into Andrew's world. Clara had managed to secure fake IDs, granting us access to the club. Inside, the atmosphere was electric, the air thick with music and mystery. Crystal chandeliers cast fragmented light across the room, illuminating the faces of people who were undoubtedly hiding secrets of their own. We scanned the crowd, searching for any sign of Andrew. Finally, we spotted him in a private booth surrounded by a few men in suits and a woman whose laughter pierced through the noise. "Stay close," Clara whispered, pulling me toward the bar. As we settled in, the bartender approached. "What can I get you?" "Something light," Clara said with a wink. I, however, couldn't focus on the drinks. My eyes were locked on Andrew. Every move he made, every interaction, it was all a reminder of Rossy's pain. Clara nudged me. "Don't stare too long. He'll notice." But it was too late. Andrew's gaze locked onto mine, a smirk curling his lips. He leaned toward one of his associates and whispered something before standing up. "Paula, he's coming this way," Clara said, her voice tense. My heart raced as Andrew approached, his presence dominating the space around him. "Ladies," he said smoothly, his eyes flicking between us. "I don't believe we've met. I'm Andrew." I forced a smile, every nerve in my body screaming to run. "Nice to meet you. I'm Paula." Andrew's eyes lingered on me, a flicker of recognition passing through them. "Paula, such a lovely name. Enjoy your night, ladies." As he walked away, Clara grabbed my arm. "He knows, doesn't he?" I nodded, my chest tightening. "He knows." The encounter at the Velvet Shadow left us rattled, but it also gave us insight. Andrew was suspicious, and now we were certain he was hiding more than we'd initially thought. Back at Clara's apartment, we laid out everything we had gathered so far. Andrew's nightclub was a front for illegal activities, including drug distribution and human trafficking. The more we uncovered, the clearer it became that Andrew wasn't just Rossy's abuser. He was a monster preying on the vulnerable. "We need to take this to the authorities," Clara said, her voice firm. I shook my head. "We can't. Not yet. He's too powerful. If we go to the police now, he'll know it was us, and he'll find a way to silence us." Clara's face darkened. "Then what do we do?" "We find proof. Solid proof that links him to everything he's done. Only then can we bring him down." Our plan was risky, but it was the only way. The next step in our investigation was to infiltrate Andrew's office at the Velvet Shadow. Clara and I devised a plan to slip in during one of the club's busiest nights when security would be stretched thin. We arrived early, blending into the growing crowd. Clara distracted the bouncers while I slipped past them and into the restricted areas. My heart pounded as I navigated the dimly lit corridors, every creak of the floorboards setting me on edge. Finally, I found Andrew's office. The door was locked, but Clara had given me a small tool to pick it. My hands trembled as I worked the lock, every second feeling like an eternity. When the door clicked open, I slipped inside and closed it quietly behind me. The room was lavish, a stark contrast to the shadows that surrounded Andrew's life. I hurried to the desk, searching through drawers and files. Most of it was mundane, financial records, employee logs, but then I found a folder marked confidential. Inside were documents that linked Andrew to several illegal operations, including payments made to keep certain people quiet. Just as I was about to leave, I heard voices approaching. Panic surged through me as I scrambled to hide behind a large cabinet. The door opened, and Andrew stepped inside with one of his associates. "I don't trust those girls," Andrew said, his voice cold. "Keep an eye on them. If they step out of line, eliminate them." My blood ran cold. The men left shortly after, and I wasted no time slipping out of the office and back into the crowd. Clara was waiting for me near the exit, her face pale. "Did you get it?" she asked. I nodded, clutching the folder. We have everything we need. But deep down, I knew the danger had only just begun. Clara and I sat in her apartment, the tension in the air almost suffocating. The documents I had taken from Andrew's office were spread across the coffee table. Every page revealed just how deep his network ran: human trafficking, money laundering, illegal drugs, and more. "What's the plan now?" Clara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I leaned back, rubbing my temples. "We need to figure out how to make this public without putting ourselves in immediate danger." Clara's eyes flickered with doubt. "That's easier said than done. If Andrew finds out we have this, he'll come for us. And not just us, our families too." The thought sent a shiver down my spine. I couldn't risk my mother or anyone else being caught in the crossfire. "We need an ally," I said after a long pause. "Someone with power who isn't afraid to take Andrew down." Clara nodded slowly. "Do you think the authorities will listen? Or will they just tip him off?" "Not all of them are corrupt," I said, though I wasn't sure if I believed it. "We just have to find the right person." The next day, Clara and I reached out to a journalist Clara knew from her college days, a woman named Evelyn Cruz. Evelyn was known for her fearless reporting and her ability to expose corruption without hesitation. When we met her at a small cafe, she looked every bit the seasoned journalist. Sharp eyes, a notepad always at the ready, and an aura of determination. "So, what do you have for me?" Evelyn asked, her pen poised. Clara and I exchanged a glance before sliding the folder across the table. Evelyn's eyes widened as she flipped through the documents, her expression shifting from shock to anger. "This is explosive," she said, her voice low but urgent. "If what's in here is true, Andrew Salcedo isn't just a criminal, he's a predator on a massive scale. But going public with this is going to put a target on all our backs." "We know," I said, my voice firm despite my trembling hands. "But this has to come out. People need to know what he's done." Evelyn leaned forward. "All right, I'm in. But we need more than just these papers. We need testimonies, witnesses, anything that will solidify the case. Otherwise, he'll find a way to wriggle out of it." I nodded, swallowing hard. "I'll do whatever it takes." To gather more evidence, Clara and I decided to return to the Velvet Shadow. This time, we weren't just observers. We were determined to find witnesses who could testify against Andrew. Clara dressed as a partygoer to blend in, while I posed as a waitress, using a fake employee ID Evelyn had secured for me. The club was as chaotic as ever, the music pulsating through my body as I carried a tray of drinks through the crowded floor. I kept my head down, avoiding Andrew's gaze whenever he passed. As I made my way to the VIP section, I noticed a young woman sitting alone, her face pale and her hands trembling. She looked out of place, like she was trapped in a nightmare. I approached her cautiously. "Hi, are you all right?" She flinched, her eyes darting around before focusing on me. I shouldn't talk to you," she whispered. "It's okay," I said gently. "I'm here to help. My name's Paula. What's yours?" "Camille," she said after a pause. "Camille, you don't have to be afraid. Whatever's going on, you're not alone." Her eyes filled with tears. He won't let me leave. I wanted to quit, but he said if I did, he'd hurt my family." I placed a comforting hand on hers. "Listen to me. We're working to stop him. If you can tell us what you know, it could make all the difference." Camille hesitated before nodding. "Okay, I'll help, but you have to promise to protect me." "I promise," I said firmly. Suddenly, a shadow loomed over us. I looked up to see one of Andrew's enforcers glaring down at us. "What are you doing here?" he growled, grabbing my arm. Thinking quickly, I smiled. "Just taking a break." Camille looked like she needed someone to talk to. He didn't seem convinced but let go of my arm. "Get back to work. Now." As he walked away, I whispered to Camille, "Stay strong. I'll find you again." Leaving her felt like a betrayal, but I knew we couldn't risk blowing our cover. Later that night, Clara and I regrouped outside the club. Did you find anything? Clara asked. I nodded. A girl named Camille. She's terrified, but she's willing to talk. Clara smiled grimly. That's a start, but we'll need more than one witness to take Andrew down. We'll find them, I said, determination hardening my voice, no matter what it takes. But as we walked away, I couldn't shake the feeling that Andrew was already one step ahead of us. The following morning, Clara and I met Evelyn in her downtown apartment. The journalist's cluttered desk was strewn with notes, clippings, and evidence she'd compiled from our initial meeting. She greeted us with urgency, her laptop open to a draft of her article. We've made some progress, she began, gesturing for us to sit. I've verified the legitimacy of some of the documents you brought me, but this story is going to need corroboration from witnesses. Have you found anyone willing to talk? I hesitated. We've identified one, Camille. She's scared but ready to testify. She told me Andrew threatened her family if she tried to leave. Evelyn's lips pressed into a thin line. Good. But one testimony won't hold up in the face of his power and influence. We need more. Clara leaned forward, her voice steady. There are dozens of people in the Velvet Shadow who've suffered under Andrew. I'm certain of it. We just need to reach them. Evelyn nodded. Then we act quickly. I'll reach out to some trusted colleagues to help provide protection. But Paula, Clara, if Andrew catches wind of what we're doing, he won't just threaten us, he'll act. Be prepared for that. Her warning hung heavy in the air, but it only fueled my resolve. That night, Clara and I returned to the Velvet Shadow, this time with a concrete plan. Evelyn had arranged for a hidden camera to be disguised in Clara's necklace, hoping to capture incriminating footage. As I slipped back into my waitress disguise, I couldn't shake the unease in my chest. The club's vibrant chaos felt more oppressive than ever, and every shadow seemed to harbor danger. I passed Camille in the hallway near the VIP lounge. Her eyes flickered with recognition, but she quickly looked away, her fear palpable. I mouthed soon, and she gave a barely perceptible nod. Clara, meanwhile, was mingling with the crowd, her hidden camera capturing interactions between Andrew and his associates. As I delivered drinks, I overheard snippets of conversation, deals being made, threats being issued. The weight of their corruption was suffocating. Then, I saw him, Andrew Salcedo. He stood at the center of the VIP section, exuding an air of control. His piercing gaze swept over the crowd, and for a terrifying moment, his eyes locked onto mine. I quickly looked away, focusing on the tray in my hands. My heart raced as I retreated to the safety of the bar. Stay calm, Clara whispered into the small earpiece we both wore. We can't blow our cover now. I nodded, steadying my breathing. Hours passed, and we managed to record several damning conversations. But as we prepared to leave, disaster struck. A bouncer approached me near the staff exit, his expression unreadable. "Boss wants to see you," he said, grabbing my arm. Panic surged through me, but I forced myself to stay calm. Why? Did I do something wrong? "Just come with me," he said, dragging me toward the VIP section. Clara's voice crackled in my ear. "Paula, what's happening? Should I intervene?" "No," I whispered back. "Stay hidden. We can't risk losing the footage." Andrew was waiting for me, his cold smile sending chills down my spine. "I've been watching you," he said, his tone deceptively casual. "You're new here, aren't you?" I nodded, my voice trembling. "Yes, sir. Just started last week." He leaned in, his eyes narrowing. "You're awfully curious for someone so new. Care to explain why you've been snooping around?" My mind raced for an excuse. I was just trying to familiarize myself with the place. I didn't mean to cause any trouble. Andrew studied me for a long moment before his smile returned. "We'll see about that. For now, get back to work." Relief flooded me as he waved me away, but I knew the encounter was a warning. The next morning, Clara and I reviewed the footage with Evelyn. The hidden camera had captured enough to expose Andrew's criminal empire. Conversations about trafficking routes, coded transactions, and even thinly veiled threats to those who crossed him. "This is enough to blow the lid off his operations," Evelyn said, her excitement tempered by caution. "But it also puts all of us in extreme danger." Clara crossed her arms, her jaw tight. "We knew the risks when we started. The question is, what's our next move?" Evelyn leaned back in her chair. "We need to release this strategically. If we go straight to the authorities, there's a chance they'll tip him off. But if we go public, we lose the element of surprise." As we debated our options, my phone buzzed with an unknown number. I hesitated before answering. "Paula," a trembling voice said. "It's Camille. They found out I talked to you." My blood ran cold. "What? Are you safe?" I'm hiding for now, but they're looking for me. Please, you have to help." I turned to Clara and Evelyn, my voice urgent. "Camille's in danger. They know she talked to us." Evelyn's expression hardened. "If we don't act now, she won't survive this. We need to get her somewhere safe." Clara grabbed her keys. "Let's go. We don't have much time." As we raced to find Camille, the weight of our mission pressed down on me. We were close to exposing the truth, but the cost was growing higher with every step. And deep down, I knew Andrew wouldn't let us win without a fight. The drive to Camille's hiding spot was tense, the weight of urgency heavy in the air. Evelyn, her knuckles white against the steering wheel, navigated the city streets while Clara and I scoured the location Camille had texted, a rundown motel on the outskirts of town. "She said she's in room 17, Clara said, her voice taut with anxiety. "If they're looking for her, they might already be there." As we pulled into the motel's dimly lit parking lot, a sinking feeling settled in my stomach. Two black SUVs were parked near the entrance, their presence ominous. "Those aren't random cars," Evelyn muttered. "Andrew's men." "We need a plan," Clara said. "We can't just walk in there and hope for the best." Evelyn reached into her bag and pulled out a small recording device and a canister of pepper spray. "We gather evidence if we can, but the priority is getting Camille out. Alive." Clara nodded, and we moved quickly but cautiously toward room 17. I knocked lightly, glancing nervously at the SUVs. There was no response. My heart pounded as I tried the doorknob. It was unlocked. Inside, the room was dim, the curtains drawn. The air smelled of mildew and fear. Camille sat huddled in a corner, her face pale and tear-streaked. Her wide eyes lit up when she saw us. "Paula," she whispered, her voice trembling. "They've been circling the motel all night." "We're getting you out of here," I said, rushing to her side. Before we could make it to the door, heavy footsteps echoed down the hallway. Evelyn quickly pushed us back into the shadows, her hand motioning for silence. The door swung open, and two of Andrew's men entered. They were tall and broad-shouldered, their expressions cold and calculating. "She's here somewhere," one of them said, scanning the room. Evelyn stepped forward, her recording device hidden in her palm. "What do you think you're doing, barging in like this? I'm a journalist, and I'll have you know." One of the men sneered. "A journalist? Wrong place, lady. Leave now, or you'll regret it." Evelyn held her ground, distracting them long enough for Clara and me to help Camille slip out through the bathroom window. As we crawled out, I heard the sharp hiss of pepper spray and the sound of scuffling inside. Evelyn burst out moments later, her eyes watering but victorious. "Let's go," she shouted. We piled into the car, speeding away as the men stumbled out of the motel, shouting threats that made my blood run cold. Back at Evelyn's safe house, Camille was shaking uncontrollably, her words tumbling out in panicked fragments. They said they'd kill me, that I'd regret talking to you." Clara knelt beside her, holding her trembling hands. "You're safe now, Camille. We won't let them hurt you." Evelyn paced the room, her expression grim. "This is escalating faster than I anticipated. Andrew knows we're closing in, and he's getting desperate. We need to act before he tightens his grip." Camille looked up, tears streaming down her face. "I have more names, others who've suffered because of him. but they're too scared to come forward. I placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. Then we'll fight for them, for all of you. Andrew has silenced people for too long, but not anymore. Evelyn nodded. We'll compile everything we've gathered, footage, testimonies, and evidence. Once we have enough, we'll take it public. But what if he comes after us? Clara asked, her voice shaking slightly. Evelyn's gaze hardened. He will. But if we expose him thoroughly and quickly, he won't be able to hide behind his power. As night fell, the safe house became a hub of frantic activity. Evelyn typed furiously on her laptop, crafting a comprehensive exposé. Clara helped Camille record her testimony, her voice trembling but determined. I sorted through the footage we'd captured, piecing together the puzzle of Andrew's criminal empire. But even as we worked, the threat loomed larger. Every noise outside, every shadow in the window, felt like a harbinger of danger. Andrew wouldn't let us dismantle his empire without a fight. The following evening, Evelyn received a message from one of her contacts, a lawyer who claimed to have inside information on Andrew's operations. He wanted to meet us at a secluded location downtown. This could be the breakthrough we need, Evelyn said, her voice tinged with hope. If he's legitimate, he could corroborate our findings and add credibility to the story. Clara frowned. It could also be a trap. We can't trust anyone connected to Andrew. Evelyn hesitated, then nodded. You're right. We'll proceed with caution. The meeting was set for a deserted parking garage. The air was thick with tension as we arrived, the shadows playing tricks on my mind. A man stepped out from behind a column, his suit immaculate and his demeanor calm. I assume you're Evelyn, he said, extending a hand. Evelyn shook it cautiously. And you're the lawyer? Call me Marcus, he replied. I've been working with Andrew for years, but I've had enough. The things I've seen. He's a monster. As Marcus began to share details of Andrew's operations, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. His answers were too rehearsed, his demeanor too smooth. Then I saw it, a faint red dot moving across the wall behind him. My heart stopped. Get down, I screamed, pulling Evelyn to the ground just as a gunshot rang out. Marcus collapsed, blood pooling beneath him. Panic erupted as more shots echoed through the garage. Clara and I dragged Evelyn to cover, the sound of tires screeching signaling our attackers' retreat. When the chaos subsided, Marcus was dead, and we were left shaken and exposed. Evelyn clutched her laptop to her chest, her face pale. This was a message, she said, her voice trembling. Andrew knows what we're doing, and he's not afraid to kill. Clara's eyes burned with fury. Then we hit him harder. We're not backing down. As we fled the scene, I realized the stakes had reached a deadly crescendo. Andrew was no longer just a shadowy threat. He was a predator, and we were his prey. But despite the danger, we couldn't stop now. Too many lives depended on us exposing the truth. The car ride back to the safe house was shrouded in a tense silence. The sound of Clara's knuckles tapping against the dashboard was the only thing breaking the stillness, a nervous rhythm that mirrored the urgency in our hearts. Evelyn was still clutching her laptop, her grip so tight her knuckles turned white. What now? Camille finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Evelyn took a deep breath, her voice steady but sharp. We go public, immediately. Andrew's escalating. He's crossed into murder. If we wait, we risk more lives, including our own. But we don't have enough yet, Clara countered. We need more evidence to make this airtight. If we go public now, Andrew will spin it as lies and smear us before the truth sticks. I nodded. Clara's right. We need to find the linchpin, the one piece of evidence Andrew can't refute. Evelyn sighed, her fingers running through her hair. And we need to find it fast. Marcus's death will have ripple effects. If Andrew tied up that loose end, he'll be tying up others. We returned to the safe house just as the sun began to rise, its pale light doing nothing to ease the shadows of fear in the room. Exhaustion weighed heavy on us, but sleep was out of the question. Evelyn began piecing together what we already had. a network of crimes, intimidation, and now murder. But there was still no definitive smoking gun. "Wait," Camille said suddenly, her eyes wide. "There's something I haven't told you." We all turned to her. "What is it?" Clara asked, her voice cautious but hopeful. Camille hesitated, her fingers fidgeting with the hem of her shirt. "Andrew has a safe, a physical one. I saw him open it once when I was working for him. He keeps his most important documents there. Contracts, ledgers, blackmail material. It's the core of his empire." Evelyn's eyes lit up. "Where is it?" Camille swallowed hard. "In his office, the one downtown." Breaking into Andrew's office was a plan born of desperation and necessity. The risk was monumental, but the potential reward was greater. If we could retrieve the contents of that safe, we could destroy Andrew once and for all. "We can't just waltz in," Clara said as we gathered around a map of the office building. "It's heavily guarded, and the safe will definitely be protected." Evelyn smirked. "Good thing I know a guy." Hours later, we met with Tony, a wiry man with a knack for bypassing security systems. He agreed to help, though his expression suggested he thought we were insane. "You're either brave or stupid," he said, shaking his head. "Maybe both." The plan was simple in theory, but daunting in execution. Tony would disable the building's alarms and cameras for a brief window, allowing us to slip inside. Camille would guide us to the safe, and Evelyn, with her journalistic resourcefulness, would crack it. As night fell, we stood outside the imposing office building, our breaths fogging in the cool air. Tony's voice crackled through the earpiece. "You've got 20 minutes before I have to bring the systems back online. Make them count." The lobby was eerily quiet as we slipped inside. Camille led the way, her familiarity with the building guiding us past guards and locked doors. My heart pounded with every step, each shadow feeling like it held unseen eyes. Finally, we reached Andrew's office. The safe was hidden behind a painting, classic but effective. Evelyn got to work, her fingers flying over the lock. Minutes ticked by, each one feeling like an eternity. "Hurry," Clara urged, glancing nervously at her watch. "I'm trying," Evelyn muttered. Then, with a triumphant click, the safe opened. Inside was a trove of incriminating evidence, bank statements, contracts, photographs, and a hard drive labeled Blackmail Archive. Evelyn stuffed everything into her bag, her eyes shining with determination. "This is it," she whispered. "This is what we needed." But as we turned to leave, the sound of footsteps echoed down the hallway. "They're here," Camille whispered, panic in her voice. "Tony, we need a distraction," Evelyn hissed into the earpiece. "I'll see what I can do," Tony replied, his voice strained. Moments later, the fire alarm blared, the sudden noise startling the guards. Taking advantage of the chaos, we slipped out of the office and into the stairwell. The descent was harrowing, every creak of the stairs feeling like a death knell. As we reached the ground floor, a guard spotted us. "Hey!" he shouted, raising his radio. Before he could call for backup, Clara tackled him, her movements swift and precise. "Go!" she shouted. "I'll catch up." We hesitated, but Evelyn pulled us forward. "We can't waste time. She'll be fine." Back at the safe house, the atmosphere was electric. Clara returned an hour later, bruised but smiling. "Guards out cold," she said, collapsing onto the couch. Evelyn wasted no time. She pored over the contents of the safe, her excitement growing with each new discovery. "This is gold," she said, holding up a contract that tied Andrew to multiple shell companies. "He's been laundering money through these businesses for years." The Blackmail Archive was even more damning. Video recordings, incriminating emails, and detailed notes on his victims painted a picture of a man who thrived on manipulation and fear. "We need to release this now," Evelyn said. "No more waiting." Within hours, Evelyn's exposé was live. She uploaded the evidence to multiple platforms, ensuring its dissemination even if Andrew tried to suppress it. Social media exploded with outrage, the revelations sparking a firestorm of condemnation. But as the hours passed, the weight of what we'd done settled in. Andrew wouldn't take this lying down. The fight was far from over. As we braced for the fallout, I looked at my friends, Evelyn, Clara, Camille. We'd come so far, risking everything for the truth. And now, as the storm loomed on the horizon, I knew one thing for certain. We were ready to face it, no matter the cost. The morning after Evelyn's expose went live, the world was ablaze with scandal. News outlets picked up the story, amplifying the damning evidence against Andrew. The hashtags #ExposeAndrew and #JusticeForVictims trended worldwide. While we celebrated this temporary victory, we knew it was only the beginning. Andrew's response came swiftly. His legal team issued statements denying all allegations, dismissing the evidence as fabricated. His allies in the media launched smear campaigns against Evelyn, Camille, and even Clara. They painted Evelyn as a disgruntled journalist, Camille as a vengeful former employee, and Clara as a manipulative accomplice. But the evidence spoke for itself. The public outcry was deafening. Protests erupted outside Andrew's corporate headquarters, and several of his associates began to distance themselves from him, sensing the tides were turning. Despite the mounting pressure, Andrew wasn't done. That afternoon, Evelyn received a chilling email. "You've made a grave mistake. Retract your lies, or you'll regret it." Her face paled as she read it aloud. Camille slammed her hand on the table. "That bastard. He's threatening us now?" Clara was calmer but resolute. "This isn't just a threat. He's desperate. We've struck a nerve." But we all knew what Andrew was capable of. His desperation made him more dangerous than ever. 2 days later, the situation escalated. Camille's apartment was ransacked. Her belongings were destroyed, and a message was scrawled across the wall in red paint. "You're next." Camille was shaken but defiant. "This proves he's scared. If he thinks this will stop me, he's wrong." Still, it was a sobering reminder of how far Andrew would go. Evelyn contacted a friend in law enforcement who arranged for extra surveillance around the safe house. But we couldn't rely on security alone. We needed to stay one step ahead of Andrew to anticipate his next move before he could strike. The breakthrough came late one night when Evelyn found an encrypted folder on the hard drive we'd retrieved. With some help from Tony, the hacker, we managed to crack it open. Inside were records of illegal deals Andrew had conducted with high-profile figures, including politicians and law enforcement officials. "This is it," Evelyn whispered, her voice trembling. "This is the linchpin. He's not just a criminal. He's part of a corrupt network." But as we prepared to release this final piece of evidence, the power in the safe house went out. The sudden darkness was oppressive, suffocating. "Everyone stay calm," Clara said, her voice steady despite the tension. We grabbed flashlights and weapons, anything we could use to defend ourselves. The sound of footsteps outside sent shivers down my spine. "They found us," Evelyn whispered. The next moments were a blur of adrenaline and fear. The intruders kicked down the door, their faces masked. They moved with precision, clearly professionals sent by Andrew. "Get down," Clara shouted, grabbing a chair and throwing it at the first man. The room erupted into chaos. Evelyn clutched the laptop, her sole focus on protecting the evidence. Camille and I fought back with whatever we could find. Books, a lamp, even a fire extinguisher. Clara, trained and fearless, took down 2 of the men, her movements fluid and deliberate. But we were outnumbered. Just as it seemed we were losing ground, the sound of sirens filled the air. The intruders hesitated, their momentary confusion giving us the chance to fight back harder. The police arrived, storming the building and arresting the attackers. Among them was one of Andrew's top enforcers, a direct link to him. The arrest of Andrew's enforcer turned the tide. Under pressure, he provided testimony that not only implicated Andrew but also exposed the entire network of corruption. Andrew was arrested days later, his empire crumbling around him. Evelyn's expose became a cornerstone in the case against him. Public support surged, with many praising her bravery and our efforts to bring the truth to light. But the scars remained. Camille decided to leave the city, seeking a fresh start away from the memories of Andrew's horrors. Clara, ever the fighter, began working with organizations that supported victims of corruption and abuse. As for Evelyn and me, we continued our fight for justice, knowing there would always be more battles to face. The journey had changed us all, leaving us stronger but also more aware of the darkness in the world. Yet, in that darkness, we had found something worth fighting for, a light that no amount of fear or corruption could extinguish. We had won this war, and though the scars would remain, so would the triumph of standing together against the odds. Thanks you for watching. Hope you enjoyed the story. Please don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe for more delightful stories.